Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Well, thank you, Vicky. It's a delight to be speaking to you in a 1606 manner with no microphone. Hopefully my voice will last. Where's the microphone? Good one. I would also like to pay my respects to the Indigenous people of this area and their respects to their elders, current, past and developing. The wonderful people from the Noongar tribe, the Noongar nation, I should say. Here we are on this incredible place, which is so important to them. And in fact, if we were here, say 400 years ago, we're looking over towards where the Kwinana Freeway is, we wouldn't see a great road. We would see a very, very important facility for those people, because that was such an incredible food source area, crabbing and mussels and fish and so forth, are over there. If we were here 321 years ago, and we cast our eyes out here, we might see Vlaming and his party working their way up the river as they explored this amazing river, which they then called the Black Swan River. And of course, they only got as far as the causeway, which of course was the delta of the Swan River, and they didn't get any further. And if we were here 192 years later ago, 192, we might see Sterling and his team working their way up the river. Of course, they had a little bit more oomph than those Dutchies. They skull dragged their boats, took them 2 days over the delta and up into the higher reaches of the Black Swan River, and up they went further and further, looking at the magnificent soil of Western Australia. If only they'd moved another mile inland and found the Mangara sands, it might have been a different story. If we'd been here 150 years ago, we might have seen a sailing barge coming down here, working between the ports of Guildford, the port of Perth and the port of Fremantle, before the Canning Highway and the Stirling Highway were only mud tracks. And if we were here 75 years ago, we might have seen the Catalinas taking off over by Royal Perth Yacht Club as a part of that great conflagration of the Second World War. What an incredible place we are at. And you might say, what on earth am I mentioning those stories, considering we are here to talk about Duyfken? The point is, it's about stories. What we are standing on, and you people are standing beside, is one of the great storytelling machines. Because stories are so important to us. I was born in England. I came out here when I was 4. The English stories are not my stories. The stories of the Noongar people over there, the Catalinas, the Flamings, these are my stories. But I don't learn those stories unless I have ways in which the stories can be told. And that is why this ship is so important. Sometimes we get carried away thinking that we are just running a ship because it's a pretty thing. We are not running a ship because it's a pretty thing. We are running the ship to tell the stories of us. All of us. All of us. So how did the story of this ship start? Well, it really started with another ship. It started with Endeavour. Because we had just spent 6 years building her in Fremantle. And it was an amazing achievement by many people, and some of them are here tonight, like Jenny Scran. And there was a movement, a swelling, a feeling that maybe if we could build that ship, we should build another. But we knew the whole reason of building that ship was that she would sail to the British coast, to the mystical east, where we are on the Dutch coast. And so the thought was that we should build, if we can build a British ship, we should also build a Dutch ship. And there was a young Michael Young, sometimes described as a hippie from Bali. And isn't it wonderful that a hippie from Bali can make something like this happen? And Michael came and saw me. I had just been 6 years building Endeavour, and he said, "Would you like to build another one?" And I said, "No! No, I want to go play with the one I've just built." And so I said, "Look, Mike, honestly, you need to find someone who's going to drive this for you, someone who can press the right buttons, who's well connected and so forth. Why don't you go and see Michael Kalis?" Patricia, I duck and throw things at her. And so off Michael Young did, and he went to see Michael, and he found fertile ground. And Michael gathered around him an incredible group of people who then formed that first board to raise the money and then to go and knock on the door of Richard Court's government. And young Colin Barnett, who's here this evening, was a minister in that government. And I'll never forget the day when Richard Court stood at the West Australian Maritime Museum, represented today by Ian McLeod, who's just down here below us. And he handed over a gilder, a great big gilder, had $500,000 written on it. And he said, Richard Court said, "Here you go. Here is the starting point for your fundraising." The letter that came with it was written by Colin Barnett. And what it said was, "You shall go and raise the rest of the money." So I don't think anybody knew how much that was. It turned out to be like $4.5 million, so but it was a good start, the 500. And you are to build the ship, and you are to sail it up and down the coast a bit and try her out, and then you have to give it to the West Australian Maritime Museum. Well, that didn't work. So then Michael gathered around him with the help of Noel Robbins, an amazing man, a quadriplegic, a man who had a terrible car accident and went on to helm an America's Cup yacht. What an extraordinary man he was. And Noel pulled together the team, many of them Endeavour people, but he had a couple of really important people, one who stood higher than the rest, Bill Leonard. And Bill's not here this evening, and quietly spoken Scott. What an incredible man. I've said it a number of times, I'll say it again. If we had the Japanese system of living legends, he'd be one. Because he's an extraordinary man. And he's surrounded him with people like Igor Bjorkston. You can see Igor's work above you. And many of the others from Jenny Scrahan, who did the carvings, and many other people from the Endeavour and from other sources. And they gathered them around and they started the construction of this ship. And of course, there's always a bit of competition, isn't there, with Australians? Well, they've built the Endeavour, we're going to do a bit better with the Duyfken, so we're going to make it more authentic. We're not going to use jarrah, we're not going to laminate anything. It's going to be out of European oak. It wasn't Dutch oak, it was Latvian oak, but never mind. And we're going to build it the same way. What an extraordinary thing to happen in the most remote city in the world. To find people capable with no previous experience of this method of construction, to be able to build a ship by fire and water, plank first, put the frames in later, and build the ship that you're standing on today. It is, an extraordinary thing. And remember that what we are standing on is in fact unique. There is no other ship like this in the world. I'll come to that a little bit later. So on the 12th of January, 1997, the Crown Prince Willem Alexander of Orange, shall I get that right? Yeah. Willem Alexander of Orange. I had to write that down. It's a bit weird. It's a bit Dutch. He's now, of course, the king. God bless him. He laid the keel of this ship. And off went Bill Leonard and Jenny and Igor and all the other wonderful people that built this ship. And for 2 years, in the front courtyard of the West Australian Maritime Museum's Shipwreck Gallery, they built this vessel, designed by Nick Birmingham. An enormous amount of research had to go into it. Because unlike Endeavour, where we had incredibly detailed drafts which we could build a ship from, this ship had to be created from basically research. And Nick and a lot of people in Holland a lot of people at the West Australian Maritime Museum, Bill, with his innate way in which ships come together, was able to come up with a design of a Dutch yacht. So this is a Dutch yacht that carries the name Yacht. I thought I was pretty bloody good. I'm English, for God's sake. Give me a break. This is a Dutch yacht. And they were as common as Mack trucks. They were everywhere. You know, New Amsterdam, which came New York, was settled by Dutch yachts. Yachts. It was Dutch yachts that tried to do the Eastern Passage above Russia. They were everywhere. And so it was there was lots of resource material for Nick Birmingham and these guys to draw on. But what an amazing job they did. And they were lucky. They were lucky that early in the design process, where there were many paintings of these vessels, and there were many of the, if you like, from the water up, there wasn't much below the water. And in Holland they had just found a wreck of a 1590 ship, so same period, but it had sunk into the mud and they'd lost everything above the waterline, and there it was below the waterline. And so that gave an enormous clue as to how the underwater shapes of this ship were built. So then, exactly 20 years today, we'd all be getting over our hangovers, wouldn't we? The 24th of January, maybe we'd still be developing them, I don't know. 1997, this ship was launched. What an amazing week that was leading up to it. Do you remember, if you were lucky enough to be there, where the ship was literally put on a dirty, great big trailer and dragged through the streets of Frio down to the wonderful Kalis Yard, where the great shiplifter was picked her up, and on the 20 years exactly today, she was put into the water. Igor then threw up the rig. We went for a sail. I was on that very first sail, and she was pretty tippy. She would have been terrific. But the problem was the 20th century, for the first time, went kapow. Hang on, you built exactly what was, but if you bought one of them from 400 years ago, we'd still be telling you it's not safe. How crazy were those people? And of course, they're just following the legislation. So the ship was a bit tippy, so she had to come out. She didn't have an engine. We were dreamers. They were dreamers. You could sail the ship without an engine. It's never going to happen. So the engines were fitted, and a keel, a steel keel with lead, was fitted below her. In fact, what they did was put a cargo into her, and that basically brought her back to very similar to what the ship would have been at the time. Kenny McAlpine was an incredibly important man in that. Ken, of course, is not here. He's in Turkey as we speak. He went on, had an amazing career in the America's Cup as the great measurer for America's Cup for many, many years. In fact, last year was inducted into the America's Cup Hall of Fame. An amazing technical man who sorted out the initial problems of the ship. By that time, Noel had left, and Graham Cox, who's an apology tonight, took over running the project. He read the letter from Colin Barnett, sail it up and down, give it to Ian. He said, stuff that. We're going sailing. And he quickly put together an amazing voyage. Because one of the people who had invested enormously in this ship was a guy called Julius Teher. And Julius had given an Indonesian gentleman who gave $250,000 towards the ship. And so it was important that the ship went to Indonesia. And so in April 2000, the ship left on the Chevron 2000 voyage. And what an extraordinary voyage it was. Right up through the Spice Islands, through Indonesia, at the same time as the East Timor crisis was going on, and relationships between Australia and Indonesia were at one of their lowest ebbs ever. And there was this ship, rocking up through the most amazing, going to places like Banda and the other Spice Islands. Just extraordinary. She sailed all the way through there, and then finally arrived on the west coast of Cape York Peninsula at Pennefather River and carried from the Noongar people here message sticks and did a reconciliation with the Wik people of that area. What a fantastic thing that was. She then sailed on down to Sydney. Well, what a great voyage. Tim Severin, if you know anything about Tim Severin, the amazing man who built, Brendan, a curragh, an Irish curragh, and sailed it out of Ireland, who built a Bronze Age galley, who built a Vietnamese bamboo boat. And his model was always, what you do is you build the boat, you do the voyage, you write the book, you make the film, you get rid of the ship. Job done. Maybe after that voyage, if Tim Severin had been running it, he'd have taken it out and pulled the plug and sunk her, because that's his model. But that wasn't Graham Cox's model, it wasn't this ship's model, because what was coming around the corner was the 400th anniversary of the start of the world's first great corporate organisation. The VOC pronounced?
VOC.
No. I can say VOC. Come on. Who can say it? Hey, Frank. Board member Frank. Choice silence for Frank. Say again, Frank.
De Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie.
That's what you were going to say, wasn't it? So this great, the 400th anniversary of this fantastic company, and they contacted this ship, or Graham contacted them, how would you ever know? And it was decided that the ship would go to the Netherlands to be a part of that celebration. And were they going to put it on a ship and take it there? God, no. They were going to sail it there. So very shortly after arriving in Sydney, they arrived there in January. In May, only 4 months later, they trained a crew, found a crew, and off they went. It took them almost exactly 1 year to sail this ship from Sydney to Batavia, across the Indian Ocean. They got round the Cape of Good Hope by literally heaving to and letting the Agulhas current carry them around. They sailed up to the doldrums. They didn't turn the engine on. They wafted their way across the doldrums. And they finally arrived off Texel. Unfortunately, there was a band ready to play at a certain time. It's always the curse of these voyages. And so for the last 2 days, they had to turn the engines on to make sure that they could get to where the band and the mayor was. Otherwise, they sailed this ship the whole way.
And as the boat came round the corner, the sun started to show.
There you were there.
Yeah.
So then, the ship then, the Dutch people, I have been told, was truly amazed. A, that Australians had built the ship, and secondly, that they'd sailed it there. She then went into the Isle of Mare and she did a wonderful tour of, I think, 6 of the 7 provinces that front onto the Isle of Mare. And it was an incredible success. But when it was all over, the sponsors decided that it was cheaper to ship her back than sail her back. Maybe everyone was exhausted anyway. So the ship was dismasted and she was shipped back to Fremantle. I think that was a great sadness. It would have been so much better to have sailed her back and she'd arrived in glory rather than as deck cargo on some rather crappy Dutch ship. Don't you love ripping the Dutch up? Anyway, Duyfken then entered into a rather a tough time because many of the people associated with the ship were exhausted. Many thought Tim Severin had it right, and so forth. And basically, the ship was there, and she had to now think, what next? And what next is never easy unless you plan well ahead. And I don't think the planning well ahead had been done. And so for the next 2 or 3 years, the ship struggled. Jenny Gibbs did a huge amount of work keeping her going. And good on you, Jen. And Cian Pierre was there and so forth. And she, for long of a time, you might remember, she was over there at the Swan River on the old Swan Brewery site. Terrible sight for her, the southerlies bashing her against the jetty and so forth. And Duyfken was starting to go downhill. And Tim was looking pretty smart at this stage. But then, of course, history and stories came to her, because 2006 was just around the corner. And another politician from this neck of the woods, senator as he was then, Ian Campbell, who was the federal minister alongside John Howard, he was also the heritage minister. And he came to us and said, we have the 2006 Australia on the map celebration. It can't be done unless it's done with Duyfken as well. And the federal government kicked in $1 million. A large lump of it was spent on getting the ship back up in good order. And Gary Wilson, who had been the first mate with Peter Manthorpe on the first voyage, then took command. The Prime Minister came over and she left. She was towed out of Fremantle Harbour, fishing boat harbour, by a couple of surf boats. That was good. Yeah. And off she went. And she went through all the southern ports. Yeah. Over 90,000 people went on board to hear her stories and the stories that lead on from her. Until finally she got to Cairns. By that time, Colin and his mates were no longer in charge. And there was a change in political climate, and we sensed, by reading letters, we sensed we weren't necessarily welcome back here. So we did a deal with Cairns. And it was a good place to be for Cairns, because the other side of the peninsula from where the story of Duyfken and Australia's contact was. And so the Queensland government and the port of Cairns and the city of Cairns together funded $350,000 a year to keep the ship there. She may well have stayed there for a long, long time, but the political wheel changed again. The mayor left, their government changed, and the 3-year deal was only a 3-year deal. What next? Down to Sydney. Why? Because we had the world... Brisbane. Sorry, Casper. That's why Casper flew over here, you see. Because while the ship was in Queensland, I haven't mentioned this man over here, Casper Kuiper, who did an incredible job in supporting and keeping the ship going. In fact, you even towed the ship once, didn't you, with one of your incredible barges?
Yep, you did.
And so in Casper and gathered the Queensland people, and basically for 3 years the ship had a life there. And then the Endeavour was leaving Sydney. She was coming around doing a circumnavigation, and I heard the other day she's about to do another one. And there's a huge gaping hole at the Australian National Maritime Museum. So Casper and the lads did a deal whereby she would go and spend a year at the Australian National Maritime Museum. And when that year was over, what then? So Graham thought, well, if we're not loved in Western Australia, then maybe it's time to go back to Holland, to the Netherlands. And he did a deal, just about had a deal done, whereby the ship was going to go back to Netherlands for a 10-year lease, if you like. But Graham Cox wrote one last letter to young Colin Barnett and said, now Colin, we're about to do this. The wheel had changed here again and Colin was back in charge. Do you want this to happen or not? And Colin simply said in very untold terms, no bloody way, bring the ship home. Go on you mate, because otherwise you're here. So he funded the voyage. It was a tough little voyage because the ship was still, had lots of work needed to be done to her, but she was good. She sailed around. She did a lot of work once again. Casper and his yard did a terrific amount of work with the engineering and so forth, changing props, and I remember doing that, the props, all those sort of things. And finally, in August of 2012, the ship arrived in Fremantle, a day after a full-on southwesterly gale, which we hit at Rottnest, Fleming's Rottnest for. And then 2012, and she came back into a situation whereby She had some grants from the government. She had a lot of work that had to be done, and she also did not have a big volunteer base because she'd been away for some 6 years. But what a fantastic! The ship drew the people back in. People like Bob Meredith, Frank, and so forth came back to the ship, and the volunteer base grew, and work was done. A lotteries commission gave us a wonderful grant of $480,000, which enabled us to replace the deck. Look at this wonderful deck. The deck that we sailed in August 2012 was pretty ordinary. It was moth-eaten. Moth-eaten. I didn't know moth-eaten. Wouldn't there you go.
Salt-eaten. Salt-eaten.
So over the last 5 years, she has had an enormous amount of love, money, hard yards, and work put into her. And I think I can genuinely say that she was, about a year ago, about the best conditions she'd ever been in, until she suddenly went backwards again. Because from that direction, exactly 90 degrees on the beam, we had a 45-knot gale that blew for 24 hours. Totally extreme weather event. Forced seawater, river water, up through the exhaust system, something that's not possible, and ended up into our starboard engine. So suddenly, just when the ship had got to a wonderful condition, she was knocked down again. And what happened? People came. Tonya, where's Tonya? There she is, Tonya McCusker, the Cusker Foundation, the Burt family, Willie and Bibi Packer, who's sitting up there on the poop deck, plus 380 other people contributed to a funding program that raised every cent to replace the engines here with 2 wonderful new green John Deeres that purr away. They're yellow.
They are yellow.
I always thought they were green. I've forgotten, of course, before that, I've forgotten one thing. Before all that happened, the ship was able to tell another story, and that was to be a part of the 2016 Hartog voyage, whereby the state government funded us to sail the ship all the way up to Dirk Hartog Island to be at the anniversary, the 400th anniversary of the second arriving of a Dutch or European vessel on our coast. What an incredible effort that was. Where's Jill? There's Jill. Jill, who was 80 at the time, she's now 78, she's going backwards now. She spent every day of that, 6 months, was it, working on the ship as a volunteer. You know, it's people like Jill that give this ship, that their spirit oozes into the timber, and then the timber, it oozes back out of the timber into other people. So here we are. Yeah, good on you, Jill, and all the volunteers. So here we are. The ship's in wonderful condition, and we've got to look to our future. The wheel has turned at the moment, and the government has decided not to continue to fund the ship, and that's fair enough. That's what governments are there to do, to make decisions, and we respect that. We should be able to stand on our own feet, and that's what we are darn well going to try and do. Because the ship is what it is, and is such an accurate replica, she will never ever be able to make enough money just by sailing and by museum work. She has to have other sources of income. So the current plan is to move the ship to Aqua, so there's a whole new audience up there, a whole new groups of school children and so forth, where she can do her storytelling there. Then she'll come back, she'll do 6 months up there, she'll do 6 months back on the river with her sailing program, and that will go for the next 3 years. In the meantime, the foundation is going to try and replace that government money by taking a leaf out of the... Louder, please. Louder.
De Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie.
Because that company... the VOC, all right, VOC. Yacht. Okay, because that company was run by 17 herren, 17 governors, if you like, who ran the thing. And what the foundation is going to be looking for is to try and replace, find 17 heron, whether they be individuals or corporates or whatever, to be able to give that additional funding for the ship. So that's a plan that that the foundation is working on. This ship is in beautiful condition. If she was in poor condition, Tim might be knocking on our door. The foundation will make sure that she has a very strong future. If she fails here, then she will move somewhere else. Maybe she may have to go to the Australian National Maritime Museum, because it's easier apparently to get federal funds when you're over there. Maybe she will go to Holland. But I hope, I know every one of us here hopes, that that doesn't happen. I hope that we, this rich community, have enough joy in owning this unique ship, artefact, storytelling machine, that she can go on with a happy, full life and living up to her full potential. So I know Vicky's going to have a toast, but I would, even if you haven't, guys, you've got a glass in your hand. So here's to Duyfken. Here's to the future. 3 cheers for her. Hooray! 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 Thank you.
Lang zal ze leven in de gloria, in de gloria, in de gloria.